Hello everyone, I am Greg Smith, the Curriculum Coordinator for the BioNetwork Bioprocessing Center, and welcome to today's presentation. Today's presentation is titled Growing the Raw Material for a Grape-based Industry in Western North Carolina, and it is sponsored by the BioNetwork Bio-Business Center and the Natural Products Laboratory located in Asheville, North Carolina. Our BioForum is scheduled to run from 9 a.m. today until approximately 11 a.m. Eastern Time with questions included. Our panelist today is Chuck Blethen. Chuck owns his own vineyard, teaches wine-related courses at AB Tech, and is a distinguished Toastmaster in North Carolina. In just a moment, I'll turn it over to him and we'll begin today's BioForum presentation. If at any time today during today's presentation you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat box located on the right side of the screen. I'll be keeping a record of each question that is submitted, and we'll have a time at the end of the presentation to address all of your questions. I encourage you to register for our June BioForum entitled Opportunities for North Carolina Farmers and Growers to Produce Higher Value Crops. More information and registration is available online at ncbionetwork.org. We'd also like to remind our audience that if you log on to ncbionetwork.org/IET, you can take advantage of our free interactive e-learning tools we have created. These cover a wide variety of topics, and we are certain you will find some of these that you can use. In fact, one of these deals with growing grapes in the western part of North Carolina. Thank you. We're excited to have you all meeting with us today, and at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our panelist, Chuck Blethen.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Greg, for the introduction. We're going to be covering a series of topics today that's related to growing grapes in western North Carolina. The first slide that you're looking at there is, I guess, a good general catch-all term for what we're going to be talking about today. And as we go through here, if you would make some notes and ask some questions, if you have any questions, we'll answer them at the end of the presentation material. The first thing that we do when we take a look at growing grapes, in western North Carolina, it's very important we understand where we live in the universe of growing grapes. We've got a very, very interesting and unusual climate here in the mountains of western North Carolina. We happen to have the right amount of water falling out of the sky most of the time. And we also have soils that are very appropriate for growing grapes. Everybody calls it the really lousy red clay area that we have in the mountains. However, it turns out that red clay is really a good material for growing grapes, especially some of the cold hardy grapes that we'll be talking about here in just a few minutes. You're going to hear some degree of prejudice in my voice whenever I'm talking about the grapes. We prefer to grow grapes naturally, organically, or biodynamically, and live with them in a way that we call integration with the permaculture in the mountain counties. And so as we go forward here, you'll hear that although I encourage people to grow grapes any way they can grow grapes, we do have a natural preference here for trying to grow things organically or biodynamically. If you take a look at the map of North Carolina, you'll see that there are three major areas or regions, we call them, for growing grapes. There's the coastal region designated on the right-hand side of the map there. Sand Hills, or coastal region is called. And this primarily means that the soils there are made up mostly of sand, and it's very hot and very humid in that region. So you're almost precluded from growing a lot of grapes that would normally be considered for growing in North Carolina. But moving to the center of the state there, you see where we call the Piedmont region. And the Piedmont region is what we refer to as the foothills, some people do. And in this rolling area, there's a number of very, very nice vineyards. Over the years, we've been able to get three designations now. We have the Rehattan Valley AVA, we have the Swan Creek AVA, and we have the Hall River Valley AVA, the newest one. And these are comparable to the regions that we know in California, such as Napa and Sonoma and so forth. And these areas have characteristics in the soil and the climate and so forth that makes them have wines that are produced in that region that are somewhat unique for that area. What we're going to be talking about today is the far left side of the screen you see there on the map, the mountain region. There's roughly 23 counties that make up our mountain region. And this particular part of the country has some unique characteristics that preclude us from growing certain types of grapes and encourage us to grow other types of grapes. And that's going to be the topic of what we're going to be covering today. Is what's appropriate there, how do we do it, what unique problems do we have, the issues to deal with, and how do we overcome those. So we take a look at Western North Carolina. From our perspective, we see that there are 5 things that makes this particular region special. The first thing is, as I mentioned earlier, we have the right amount of water falling out of the sky to grow grapes. Now, there are different rainfall areas around the western counties, but generally speaking, it falls anywhere between 35 and 60 inches of rain a year. Of course, that's a very, very good range for growing grapes. A lot of places are growing grapes here don't even have irrigation system because there is sufficient amount of water coming out of the sky. The second thing is we have the right soil and the right altitude and the steep slopes that are facing south. With a lot of mountains, we have south, east, west, and north-facing slopes, but the south-facing slopes and the southeast-facing slopes are the ones that are preferred for growing grapes. And the soil, from what we call the residual granite soils here, the red clay that everybody talks about, is predominantly the soil that we're working with when you're growing grapes. Next is we have great temperatures. If you call being a little cool or sometimes cold in the wintertime, we have really, really good temperature for growing cold hardy grapes. Now, cold hardy grapes are a little bit different from the ones that most people are familiar with. So as we go forward, we'll talk about some of those specific varieties and what makes them interesting for the mountain region. We also have a farming heritage here in the mountains of people who know how to grow things, who have a generation of growers, and these growers have farms, they have equipment, they have barns, they have the experience of growing things and working with nature and learning how to work the land. Of course, this is a great asset when it comes to growing grapes. It's not like you're starting from scratch in a terrible place without equipment or people who have to learn everything from the beginning. You get about a 90% jump on things if you've been farming in this region. So that gives us a big advantage for this area. And the fifth thing is we have truly a unique grape. This is the Katuah Muscadine that was discovered growing here in the mountains of western North Carolina. And it's the only cold hardy muscadine found on the planet. And here at Joe Luber's Vineyard, we figured out a way to propagate these little puppies. They are not easy to propagate. People who try to use dormant cutting approaches, as you'll see, have less than 1% success rate dealing with it. So what are grapes? We take a look at the classic definition of grapes. What are grapes? And you also understand that there are at least 15,000 different varieties of grapes on the planet. And these grapes have all different kinds of characteristics, rooting systems, different degrees of vigorous growth, different degrees of productivity. But the ones we want to take a look at and focus on here for the mountains are dozens of French American hybrid grapes and Native American grapes that can be grown here naturally or organically, or as we're converting here into biodynamically for western North Carolina. These French American hybrid grapes were developed out of France many, many years ago when they were trying to solve problems they had with the phylloxera that came from North America. It was killing their grapevines. In the late 1800s, France, for example, lost 75% of their vineyards. And so during this period of time when they're trying to figure out how to solve the problem, they were doing some crossbreeding, which resulted in a number of French American hybrids that are still used today for a number of vineyards. So we decided to take a look at growing grapes. I thought I'd share this vineyard decision tree with you to help step you through the kinds of thought processes you'll have to go through in figuring out what to do in putting together a vineyard. First thing you want to know, of course, is why do you want to grow grapes? Is it personal consumption? Is it tailgate markets? Selling to stores, internet sales, etc.? You try to find out what are you going to be doing with the grapes. Then you want to take a look at what the grape application is. Once you've grown these things and you need to process and make evaluated products, you're going into wine production, pies, table grapes, raisins, jams, jellies, preserves, juices, medicinal herbal extracts that are sold to the nutraceutical industry would be typical of the types of things you would look at as potential markets for what you want to do with the grapes that you're going to be growing. Next, from that, of course, you'd look at the type of grape specifically. Now we're getting down to looking at the vinifera, the classic European grapes from France, Italy, Spain, Germany, so forth. Some hybrids, the hybrids that I mentioned earlier. Whether you talk about Native American grapes, such as the Catawbas, the Niagaras, Concords, and so forth, which also includes the Muscadine. So once you've made that decision, then the next thing you want to take a look at is your particular method of growing. I've got 4 different ones mentioned here. Each one of these could encompass a full days of lectures to really get into seriously, but traditional is what we call the type of viticulture that is practiced in most of the places in California and also here in North Carolina. They're growing a wide variety of grapes down in the Piedmont area, the Nkn Valley, for example, and they're using chemical sprays and herbicides and fungicides and so forth to help the grapes grow. Then there's an approach, what we call natural growing, and then there's organic growing if you choose to get organically certified and so forth, and also the approach that we believe in here, which is Jill the Blue Ridge, we're working to become biodynamic, which is a slightly different approach to doing things, more of a natural approach to things. Then you want to take a look at the size of the vineyard, that is, how many acres you want to have under vines, of course, depending upon whether you're growing a few for yourself or if you're actually growing for resale, or if you have a use for a large amount, such as a winery, then you need to determine the size, the number of plants that you need. Then, of course, the ultimate location where you're going to put your vineyard. There's an option between flatlands, mountains, valleys, and southern exposures is the primary things we want to take a look at, and I'll cover a little bit of that in detail in just a moment. And then you also have to take a look at the vineyard layout. That means the number and the direction of the rows that you're putting in, the post locations that you have to put in order to support the crop load of the vineyard, and how much clearance between the rows for working in the vineyard. And also taking a look at the actual location on this with the vineyard layout is key, and it wouldn't hurt to have somebody help you as a consultant to determine the best way to install, design and install your vineyard. There's also a vineyard plot preparation work that has to be done. You need to do some soil analysis. You may need to plow, till the field. You'll probably have to take care of some soil amendments. It's very likely that the pH of the soil is exactly what it needs to be, and we'll cover that just in more detail in just a minute. So this basically lays out the main points that you want to take a look at if you're putting in a vineyard, and making sure you understand thoroughly each one of those points before you would proceed. But let's say that you've now made these decisions, you put your vineyard to the place where you're now starting to need a way to support all this stuff, so you have to look at the trellis. And the trellis design means the post and wires that you're going to have out there in the vineyard. It's going to be single wire, double wire, triple wire, catch wire system. This also depends upon the kind of grape that you're growing, and we'll cover that also in a little more detail. So this is the starting point for anybody who's looking to put in a vineyard in the mountains. So let's now take a look at some specific cultivars or variety types of grapes. There are 3 important species. There's a hybrid group, and this comprises most of the grape production worldwide. The first one, of course, is Vitis vinifera. Everybody just refers to it as vinifera. These are the European or wine grapes, as you see. There's a nice photo there showing a couple of really good Pinot Noir clusters. Essentially, none of these are suitable for growing in western North Carolina without the use of traditional chemicals. The disease pressure we have in the mountains here is pretty awesome. And so you really need to think about this very, very hard before you put these in, because you can grow them here. I mean, you can, but there will be a terrible price to pay in terms of the money that you're going to spend on chemicals each season, and also the increased amount of labor that will be necessary. Many of the vineyards I've talked with over the past years have been here in North Carolina. at least out in the Nkn Valley area, they're spraying the grapes somewhere between 15 to 24 times a season with these chemicals to keep the grapes alive. And so keep that in mind when you're doing your planning. The second class that we want to look at is the French-American hybrid wines and table grapes. These are some of them that we have found that would do very well here. We put in a couple test plots around the mountains here. We have 12 different varieties that we tested. Most of these we have in the ground someplace, and they seem to be doing well. Some do a little bit better than others, depending upon your location in the soil. But the little R designation at the end of the word there means for the red, and the W stands for the white. I have it underlined there on Marechal Foch. That one does particularly well here in the Marshall area. So just keep in mind that there are a variety of grapes. The third category, I'm sorry, the seedless or table grapes, what people talk about is, again, the hybrids. You have Canada's Himrod, Interlochen, Jupiter, Lakemont, Mars, Reliance, Venus, Vanessa. These grapes are all seedless. They make excellent table grapes. If somebody wants to do raisins, we would strongly suggest one of these types of grapes that we're growing here. You will be able to grow these here with a minimal amount of use of chemicals. Some of them can be grown pretty much organically. But again, keep in mind what your ultimate goal is for the grapes that you're going to be growing. The third category is Native American grapes. The Native American grapes includes America, Beta, and Bluebell. You'll see Marechal Foch over there because that one is a toss-up of whether it's a Native American grape or not. Sometimes you'll see it like I have here in both categories, but it's a good one. There's a couple of other grapes here. Call your attention to the lower left-hand side, one called Edelweiss. This one is particularly resistant to disease pressure here in the mountains. There's 10 or 15 acres of it growing just across the border over in Tennessee. Is doing quite well in the mountain areas. Norton, in the right-hand side there, also known as Cynthiana, is a great red grape that's being grown successfully here. Makes a wonderful wine. So, again, taking a look at what your intention is, take a look at the kind of grapes that you think you want to grow to make these decisions. The fourth one is the Vitis Rotundifolia, more commonly known as the Muscadine. We have the greenish, yellowish, bronze-colored one on the left-hand side there, which is called the Scuppernong, and the ones on the right-hand side, the reddish, purplish, two black ones, are called the Muscadines. But they're both a member of the Muscadine family. So you can truly say that all Scuppernongs are Muscadines, but not all Muscadines are Scuppernongs. There's two sets of wisdom that we have seen here in the mountains. One is what we call the old wisdom, that the Muscadine lacked the cold hardiness. Everybody claimed they wouldn't grow here in the Mid-Atlantic area, the Northeast or the Midwest. And what we have discovered in the last several years is the new knowledge that these cold hardy Muscadines that we've named now Katuah Muscadines are cold hardy. And they are growing here in the mountains. And we've been able to propagate them and expand our vineyard so that we're practically 100% exclusively growing the Katuah Muscadines at the Joe Blue Ridge Vineyard. There's a difference in the characteristics of these things. A lot of people think they have Muscadines growing, but if you take a look at the characteristics of them and understand it, it's very, very easy. Typically on the left-hand photograph you see there the Muscadine grape leaves as opposed to a type of vinifera American hybrid grape leaf on the right-hand side. If you look at the trunk near the ground, the trunk on the Muscadine is very smooth, and it's very, very flaky bark. We call it like shagbark hickory sort of thing, peeling off and so forth on the old wood on the traditional grapes. And the Muscadine also has a single tendril, so the little thing that grows up to grab a hold of the wires and so forth is just one little strand, and it curls around. But on all the other grapes, it's actually what we call a bifurcated or split tendril. It'll start off as one, and then at the end it'll split into two, sort of like a snake's tongue. And you can spot this very, very easily, even in wintertime, if you're wondering what kind of grape you have growing near the woods. You can see which type it is. I want to talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of grapes. Part of what we're going to be doing today is a familiarization of grapes. talk about grape flowers. On the left-hand side, you'll see the dark part of the cane. It's got often this real dark part. Attached to that is called the peduncle. That's the little stem, but the whole cluster is attached to the cane. There's a shoulder. There's the little teeny tiny pedicels you see in there, and the little flowers grow in little tips. Upper right-hand picture there, you see the calyptra, or the flower cap. It actually pops loose and falls off and reveals that little tiny funny-looking flower, if you will, down underneath on the right-hand side of the grape flowers. Have to have a magnifying glass to see some of this stuff, by the way. In many cases, especially in the Muscadine family, there are a number of male and female type plants that you have to pay attention to. For those of you who are interested in this, I thought I'd cover this very quickly. The male part of the plant is composed of the filament. You see the little tiny filament attached there. There's the anther out on the tip that's covered with pollen grains. The female has the stigma. In the center, you see the large gray area there. And the stigma is the pollen tube, contains the sperm, the embryo sac, and the egg for creating these things. This particular one happens to be called a perfect flower, and I'll show you the difference between the male and female here. On the right-hand side, you'll see the little tiny stem, which we call the pedicel. This is actually where it's connected to the plant. And you'll see out on the left-hand side, the little tiny cap-looking thing is called a stamen. And the stamen is covered with little teeny tiny bits of pollen that you really need a microscope to see. I've got one blown up there on the left just to show you some of the different kinds of pollen that you might see if you can blow up that powder large enough. And you see in the very center of it, there's basically no center part growing out as the female part. So this one is just a male flower. There's no female part to it at all. And if you take a look at this one, here's the female part. On the left-hand side, you'll see the stigma, the little tubular part where the pollen has to go down in there. But notice that all of the pedicel, notice that all the stamens are actually growing bent back away from the stigma. So the pollen can't get into the center part of the stigma in order to pollinate it and make it turn into fruit. So this one is a female flower. And notice that the pedicels on the right-hand side there, and all the anthers are curled back towards that. And here's what you see. Most of the grapes in the world are what we call perfect flowered or self-pollinating. And you can see from the diagram on the left that with the anthers there, it makes it very convenient for some insects and or the wind primarily to pollinate the flower to create the grape. And as you can see on the lower right-hand side, the pedicel there is labeled. And anytime that you see these types of flowers, and again, you have to have a microscope, magnifying glass anyway, 10 or 15x to see this properly. But you can see that it's fairly easy for the pollen to get down into the stigma to create the grape. And if you take a look at a mature grape berry, you'll hear people talk about the scar that's out on the very end of it on the top there. There again, the pedicel down at the very bottom where it's attached to the cluster. And you see some of the nomenclature that goes with grapes. Most people in the industry just call it the skin. Technically it's called the exoscarp, and the mesoscarp is called the flesh. So when you work with berries, grape berries, and start to do a little more detailed work if you get involved in breeding or you have to make some determinations, it pays to understand a little bit about the grape. So in the case of pollination, as I mentioned earlier, most grapes are self-fruitful, don't require pollinators. There are some pistil muscadines that have to be interplanted, so that you have, for example, I have seen a vineyard here in North Carolina that have a row of males and a row of females, another row of males, another row of females, and so forth. Sometimes they plant these on a scale of 7 to 1. There'd be 7 females to 1 male. I've also seen them interplanted in the same row. And I've also seen a perfect flowered row with, next to it, a female plant. And again, this will allow for the cross-pollination to take place for production of the fruit. But it's not necessary to pollinate the hand. In most cases, it's just self-pollination. There is pollination by primarily by the wind and to a lesser extent insects. So we have now going into just taking a look at some general things about it. Grapes are true berries. Usually they're about an inch less, usually round, sometimes oblong, up to 4 seeds. Berries are called the glaucous. They have a fine layer of wax or bloom on the surface that has a lot of yeast and other compounds in them to help make them grow. It also acts as a protectant in many cases. They have thin skins. Thinning is not practiced on most types, but thinning and cluster thinning and pruning and so forth, I'll cover that just a little bit. Crop load is generally controlled through proper pruning, and French-American hybrids require cluster thinning for development of quality, proper vine vigor, and getting a satisfactory crop. So, moving on into the soils and the climate, let's take a look at some things that will need some attention here. First of all, grapes are adapted to a wide variety of soil conditions. I've seen them growing as high as 9,800 feet down in Argentina. I've even seen a few places growing at sea level. They're very, very adapted to a broad range of environments. But here in western North Carolina, we typically are dealing with acidic soils, a lot of clay. Sometimes people look at deep, well-drained, light-textured soils best for wine and grapes. Highly fertile soils are unsuited because it creates so much growth that it's a big disadvantage to have grapes growing in really wonderful soil because it's very, very hard to keep them pruned and productive. So they need to suffer a little bit. So less than perfect soils is exactly where the best grapes in the world grow. Irrigation can be detrimental to grapes, internal quality. In a few cases, it's been deemed illegal, but it's beneficial to table raisin grapes where high yields are useful. And if we take a look at the mountain soils that we have here, just as a reminder, we're living in western North Carolina in Appalachian Mountains. These mountains are 600 million years old. The typical weathering results in red clay. Here on our vineyard, it's hard pan red clay. It's roughly 1.5 feet thick. Some places it's only 1 foot thick, and a few places we found it's almost 2 feet thick, but it averages around 1 foot, 1.5 feet thick here. Some places have excess is rocks. Most of the rocks that you have here are granite origin. Tends to be big chunks of quartz. And other places have hardly any rocks at all. But the common theme for our mountains here is it's over 1,600 feet and a lot of steep slopes, over 30 degrees, or 30%. So that's what we're living with. Now, in order for us to grow grapes, and this also applies to other types of bush crops and trees, you might want to take a look at these next diagrams. We wanted to figure out how to do this, and like I said, the red layer on top there represents the clay. Underneath it is sort of the crumbly debris zone, and the gray mass on the bottom there is solid granite. But this is what we have in most of the mountain areas here where you want to be planting grapes. There's a little blow-up of it, give you a little bit better idea of what it looks like. So there it is, the red clay, hard pan on top, the loose undersoil, and then the granite bedrock. This is typically what we find here in the mountains of western North Carolina. Now, most people just dig a hole in the hard pan. We did this initially. Ended up losing a lot of plants because there's a few things we didn't understand. For example, if you put water in one of these holes and you come back after a day, it'll still be there. I mean, the drainage is so poor and so bad in this hard pan red clay, it's almost like concrete. But we call it the clay pot method of growing things. But what we learned to do is actually take something like a pry bar or a 3/4 inch piece of rebar and punch a hole through that clay into that soft, loose soil underneath. This creates your drain. So now you've got drainage. And when you've got drainage in there, you can put a bucket of water in there and it'll just immediately flush down through there just like a toilet. So it's very, very loose material underneath there. and you won't get your roots rotting from the plants and trees that you put in. Now what we do is we put in a shovel full of gravel that sort of acts as a little sieve, if you will, to sort of slow down the rate at which the material above will go into it. We don't want our compost and good soil to go down in that loose material. So a shovel full of gravel does the trick. Put some compost on top of it just to give a little bit of encouragement for growing the roots down in that area. And then we set a grapevine rootstock in place there. And then we fill it up with a mixture of about 50-50 of compost and the local soil. So this gives you a good blend and gets the grape started. And then the last thing we do, of course, is we put some chipwood mulch around the base of the vine, usually about 12 inches out from the trunk all the way around. And this gives you the protection you need to keep from washing the soil away, and also helps to reduce the evaporation to keep the soil nice and moisture wet in the soil underneath. And it grows well. And ultimately, those grapevines will put their roots right down through that gravel, right into the loose underground, and they establish themselves and grow quite nicely. The next thing I want to emphasize here is the soil food web. This is reproduced in a number of articles, magazines, publications, and papers on growing all kinds of crops. The reason I'm putting in here for the grapes is that this is probably the least understood of all of the things going on in the field. Everybody pays most attention to what's happening to the grape, but our experience is that it's the soil. The magic to growing good grapes is in the soil. And if you understand how to make the soil happy and have healthy soil, you're going to grow very, very nice grapes. And even if you're growing your grapes in less than ideal soil areas, you can start to do some amendments to make things very, very nice there. But you want very, very healthy soil, and I can't overemphasize how important it is you pay attention to what's going on in the soil. So the dirt's the key, so stay with it. If you take a look at the perfect vineyard soil, and this was taken from an average of several hundred, if I remember right, healthy soil is made up of about 23% water, 25% oxygen, 7% organic matter, and 45% minerals. And a good way, I mean, without having the ability to analyze for these substances on the normal vineyard, a real good way to determine this is to dig a hole in your vineyard, 12 inches by 12 inches, a foot square, and 6 inches deep, count the earthworms. If you've got 15 or more earthworms in that half cubic foot of soil, you've got some excellent vineyard soil. That's a cheap and easy way to do it, and we're always checking for earthworms at our place, and every time we dig, we've got lots of them, so we're looking for a little bit more than what we've got, but it is worth it. The next thing you take a look at is propagation. Sometimes people get into the position where they have a vineyard, they've got to do a little bit of propagation of their own. You'll have a plant that will die from one kind of disease, or sometimes they just have a hard time to die right in the middle of a whole bunch of healthy ones. You'll have one to go away. So you want to know a little bit about propagation. The most common type of propagation is called bench grafting or dormant cuttings. Bench grafting, of course, is just taking one piece of material and grafting it onto the root of another. And the dormant cuttings is just taking in the fall after all the leaves have gone away. You can cut off a piece about 20 inches long and stick it in the ground, water it, and talk to it a little bit, and it'll grow a perfectly good grape for you. The old wisdom was on the most common method of muscadine propagation. Now we're talking specifically about Katuah Muscadines, which we prefer for the mountains here. Is something called trench layering. It's usually done by specialized nurseries, where you take one of the canes and lean it down to the ground, and put a rock on it, and wherever that vine touched the soil, it'd start growing some new vine roots. But what we've discovered is that if you want to do this in a commercial fashion, you really need to have a way of propagating a lot of them. And what we discovered through some research with North Carolina State University Extension Services, the propagation form using greenwood cuttings, it's very much like propagating blueberries, is the approach that you use to do these things hundreds or thousands at a time. The trick is getting the combination of the solar radiation, air movement, root zone temperature, and watering schedule right. And in that process, I thought I'd go through just quickly to show you how this propagation approach would work. We've got, this is about a mid-June photo. The leaves are fully out. You can see just cut off a nice shoot. You remove all the lower leaves off of the bean. You now cut it into what we call node sections. These are about 6 inches long, and you cut off or remove all of the leaves on the lower part of the stem and just leave 1 or 2 little tiny leaves on top. And then you place these cuttings in water. You want to make sure that if you're collecting these out in the field or out in the wild, they will dry up and die real fast if you don't put them in a bucket of water. So when we do collecting in the wild, we always carry a couple buckets and immediately upon cutting them, put them into the buckets of water. And then you insert this into a pine bark blueberry propagation mix. It's given a ratio by the Extension Services 1:1 peat, sand, and bark. What we've found, and this works very well out in the Piedmont area, by the way. You've got a different set of soil and temperature conditions there. But here in the mountains, we have a slightly different approach we have to do this. And then you put these in the cutting bed. They have emitters set up to spray 10 seconds every 10 minutes for about 6 to 10 weeks. The approach that we use here is we get our turnaround in about 3 weeks. We're using a much different approach than what is recommended here for the commercial vineyards out east. Here's a picture of some of the vines that we had put in after we had propagated them. They're ready to put in that fall. Here's what the typical root ball would look like. It's just covered up with roots as soon as you take it out of the little potting, which is called the potting pot, transfer the pot. And you can put this in the moist sawdust over in a greenhouse or something like that to winter over and plant it in the spring. Now, what we have found here, it's best to actually put these things in the ground in the winter. So before the first frost comes, we should put our Katuah Muscadines in the ground. You heard me talking about root layering. This is the approach you take. You bend over a cane and get it started in the ground and leave the tip exposed, and it'll grow new roots. As soon as it does, you can cut that off and transplant it, and it gives you a couple new vines. But you're really limited as to how many cuttings you can get or how many propagations you can make off of one vine. The greenwood cuttings are much better. Some of the research that we originally did was done in the environment we created with a little tiny terrarium. We had heating systems and various types of soil propagation mediums, so we're playing with looking at the humidity and trying to develop a way to do this. There's also an approach called air layering. Again, this is very limited, but it does work. And it's essentially cutting the bottom off of a 1-liter soda bottle and slipping it down over the vine and stuffing it around the tip about 3 or 4 inches of sphagnum moss, trying to keep that moist. And the roots will start growing out the side. And once this thing starts rooting out, you can see the roots through the side of the bottle. This one happens to be green. I prefer to use the clear ones. You can actually see the roots growing out around. Then you cut it off the bottom and pull the plant out of the top. That is, pull the existing plant out of the bottom that's been cut off, and you have another vine there that you can plant. But it's limited to do that. It does work, but it's very, very limited. And the propagation in the greenhouse has to depend upon the greenwood cuttings. So just to emphasize, the method does not work. Hardwood or dormant cuttings, as they're called, we've experimented with this over the years, and anytime we try this, our best success rate is just under 1% under ideal conditions. So dormant cuttings just do not work for muscadines. The greenwood propagation method is the way that you have to do it. Okay, taking a look at where we want to plant grapes. Keep in mind that cold air flows like water. It flows down the hill, just like warm air will flow up the hill. So when it comes to selecting a place for your vineyard, give some real serious thought about where you want to put this. And taking a look at some grapevine morphology, again, you're going to hear me use this terminology. Unfortunately, viticulture has a whole unique set of terms. Starting down at the very bottom there, if this is a typical vinifera, it will have to be grafted onto some kind of American rootstock in order to make it immune to the phylloxera that grows in the soil all over North America. So you'll see the graft union right down near the soil line. And that's called the trunk, that main stalk of the vine. And then you'll see what they call the head. That's where all the different little branches are coming out. That's as high as the main trunk goes, and from there it's little tiny branches. And those branches that's coming off from the main trunk there are called cordons. And so as we go forward, you'll hear me use these terms, and that's just to get you familiar with some of the terminology. Here we have looking at planting design, training, and pruning. Most grapes are trellised. They're grown in long, narrow rows. These rows are sometimes spaced as narrow as 8 or 9 feet, and sometimes as far as 15 feet apart. And sometimes you'll see dense plantings where there's only about 3 feet between vines. There are certain types of vineyards that can use that best, and others will require 8 feet between the vines. If you're talking about muscadines, you're talking about 20 feet between the vines. So laying out a vineyard really depends upon which cultivar that you're using. So this photograph to the left there is the Thompson seedless vines. They're head-trained, cane pruned, growing on a T-bar trellis, if you look at it. And the one on the lower right-hand there is what we call a bilateral cordon. That is, it's going in 2 directions there for Sangiovese. And there are catch wires up above it because these grapes will grow up, and to keep the wind from breaking them off, we have the catch wires around them. On the training systems that you would typically hear, the 2 basic forms that we talked about is the head and the cordon. Head is the permanent part of the vine. It consists of the trunk and some flattened stubs or a bulbous head at the top. The spurs and the canes develop directly out of the head. That's why we call it head cane pruning. And the cordon is a permanent part of the vine. Consists of the trunk and 1 to 4 feet long straight arms going out down the direction of the wire. And that stays in place. You never prune that off. And all of the little tiny side canes come off of that. And the spur pruning is the typical method for that. Typically, you do your pruning in late winter when the vines are dormant. Some people do it early in spring before they start leafing out, or just as they very start when the sap very begins, it's moving up the vine. And if you're dealing with vinifera American hybrids, you really want to prune only last year's growth or the 1-year-old shoots. The vine form that you ultimately have going up in your trellis is accomplished by training. And keep in mind that muscadines grapes grow on current year's growth. There's a major difference between pruning muscadines and other kinds of grapes, because all other grapes, this year's grapes grow on last year's vines, but on muscadines, this year's grapes grow on this year's growth. So if you prune your vines wrong, you won't get any grapes to speak of. So you really have to pay attention to that. One of the approaches that's somewhat detailed, it's a good measured way of learning about how to prune your vines. It's called balanced pruning. It's determining the severity or amount of 1-year wood to remove from mature vines. And you balance, if you will, next year's load crop with last year's vigor, and then eliminates the need for fruit thinning. So this is it's a pretty technical approach to doing a pruning. And once you have an established vineyard and you figured out what kind of grapes you're growing and how vigorous or how productive they are, you can start to make some adjustments on this. But in most cases, the average is about 90% of the previous year's growth has to be pruned off. I've seen some people who put in vineyards just starting and almost brings tears to their eyes for them to have to come out and cut off 90% of what they spent all last year growing. But if you don't do that, you won't get good production on your grapes. The people who are cutting this often, they bundle and they actually weigh the prune canes. And the relationship is about 20 buds are retained for the first pound of prunings and another 10 to 20 buds for each additional pound of prunings that you take off of a vine. Then the placement of the cuts then involves the choice of spur versus cane lengths of pruned shoots. The 2 types that you heard me mention before is the spur and the cane pruning. The afterweight calculations helps you decide whether to leave the number of short stubs or just a few longer shoots. And the short stubs with a few buds are referred to as spurs. Spur pruning is a unique way to prune grapevines, and you really do need to know how this works and what the difference is. And you leave the longer pieces of one-year-old wood, and those are referred to as canes. Let's take a look at spur pruning. This is the one that's most commonly used for muscadines. You use spur pruning on cultivars and the fruitful basal buds, that is, the buds at the base of one-year-old wood that will produce fruit clusters instead of only leaves. So if you're looking to do pruning on cultivars that are excessively vigorous, that is, they just grow lots of leaves and lots of canes, you might want to take a look at spur pruning as a way of keeping that under control. And you also want to use this where the particular types of grapes that you're using are considered, the wine itself as cultivars are where quality is more important than quantity. Spur pruning is a preferred method of getting a good yield on your grapes. This is what spur pruning would look like following immediately. You'll see here, looking at a cordon, there's just a couple little spurs sticking up there. And each one of those spurs sticking up has 2 or 3 buds coming out the side of the base. And in the case of a muscadine, this is where this year's growth is going to occur, and this is where this year's grapes are going to come from. Where those little buds come out of those, the bases of those, they'll grow canes that'll be 2, 3, 4 feet long, and if it's a muscadine, it'll be just loaded with grapes. If it's a typical type of grapevine, there'll be little shoots coming out of that and going up, and you'll get the grapes off of the bases of where these canes come out of this shoot. And as I said before, the muscadines are spur pruned. They're highly vigorous and have fruitful basal buds. Typically leave the spurs about 4 to 6 inches long and leave between 1 to 4 spurs on them. Muscadines are trained cordon, so once they come up to the wire and start spreading out in each direction 10 feet, you make sure that you have the spurs spaced about 6 inches apart. There'll be attempts to have canes come out between there, but you need to cut them off. If they get any closer than that, it's too crowded, they won't produce a nice crop of grapes for you. Nkn pruning, or head pruning as it's called, this is the type of thing where you've got, you're dealing with cultivars with unfruitful basal buds, that is like Thompson Seedless, and they won't produce clusters on shoots that rise from the base of last year's wood. And so what you essentially do is you have to cut these back and allow enough of a cane sticking out there where you'll get, I like to count between 8 to 12 buds, and those 8 to 12 buds are then bent back down all across the wire. Sometimes they're called the Tuscan bow system. It's actually the shape of a bow, and this will produce your best crop for certain types of grapes. But importantly, when you're selecting a type of grape, you need to know beforehand what's the characteristic of that particular vine. What kind of trellis system are you going to use? What kind of pruning system and training system you're going to use so that you can get the best crop load out of it. When the grapes reach maturity, you need to know when it's the best time to pick them. Just as a general rule here, if you're looking at table grapes, it's usually determined by the parent, color, size of the berries. If everything is plumped up nice and it really looks pretty, you can try tasting. Of course, that's always the best to see how the flavor is. If you're looking at raisins, grapes ripen fully on the vine before picking, so you really have to leave them there to get to the maximum amount of sweetness. Thompson Seedless is the most common one. There are a number of other seedless type raisins that we've discussed that are more appropriate here for the mountains. But they wait until these reach about 22 to 23 degrees Brix, which is a sweetness measurement with a little device that you can buy to measure that. And this will allow you to get the best time to pick your grapes if you're going to be making raisins. Wine grapes, typically you're looking for the sugar content between 16 to 26 Brix. 16 is really low on the scale for most grapes, but in the case of muscadines, muscadines are considered dead ripe when they're between, say, 16 to 18 Brix. I don't ever remember measuring one over 18. Most of them are coming in around 16, 17. And a lot of the other traditional grapes that grow in the mountains will easily reach 24 to 26 Brix. and those would be good juice grapes, good wine grapes. And you're also looking for pH, total acidity, and some other things in there, including tannins. And there's a specific approach to measuring and making the analysis of these types of things in a typical lab if you have a commercial vineyard. For congruent juice grapes, most important parameter there is the sugar content. They usually wait until they get to be about 15 bricks. That's pretty low for a concrete, but still that's what they do if you're just making juice. That gives them adequate sweetness in the juice and without giving you that syrupy flavor. If you're going to be growing grapes here in the mountains, you will have to deal with the weather. And I thought I'd throw in a couple slides here to give you a little hint about where we are and taking a look at some things. This chart came off of some information that was provided to me by one of the extension agents down in Henderson County a couple years ago. This is the average last spraying freeze date, and they use all of the data between 1949 and 1998. Hasn't changed a whole bunch over that long period of time. These averages still hold up pretty well. We're in Madison County. If you look on the left-hand side of the state there, halfway between the lower left and the upper left, there's a dark purple spot there. And we're just the next county to the southwest of that area where it sticks up into Tennessee. And ours here runs around the April 26th to May 1st area. Of course, we had a couple of earlier freezes that caught everything off guard here. We lost a lot of crop this season because we had warm weather, just unbelievable. We had grapes actually had popped out of some of the clusters. And we had 2 nights of pretty hard freeze and got them all. But grapes are hardy. They do come back. We had a lot of good, strong, hardy secondary buds, and they've all come back out now with grapes. So we will get a crop this year, but probably not as much as we would have gotten if we hadn't had those 2 hard days of frost after all the vines had budded out. But we'll cover that a little bit more. Taking a look at the growing season, again, you need to know the average length of your growing season for grapes. This chart right here shows, again, where we are. That dark red spot halfway between the upper left and the 2 corners of the state there. We're in the 170 to 190 range. That's actually a perfect range. You really need to have about 180 days to get most grapes ripe. If you're dealing with the Native American and the French American hybrids, that's plenty of time. If you're going to be trying to grow vinifera, you're going to need the upper end of that as much as you can get over 180. So depending on where you are on the map there, it tells you the average growing season for grapes. So if you're in the right regions, you're going to be set. If you're not, you're going to be struggling unless you really work hard at picking some varieties that will do well in your particular area. This is another interesting map that I found. Again, this points out the season. You can see Madison County sort of in western North Carolina has a 160-day line encompassing the whole thing all the way down to 180. So we're in the desired zone there, I think. So this is something you need to pay attention to. If we call it the growing season contour, and we're clearly in the 1,000 to 2,000 foot area here in Madison County. Also, you need to take a look at the minimum temperature. The minimum temperature is really what's going to dictate how successful your grapes are going to be when you're growing them. It's not during the growing season that we're talking about here, but it's during the dormant season. And how much cold temperatures your vines are capable of withstanding before they start dying in the winter. A lot of local farmers here have put in grapes over the years, didn't know anything about the cold hardy part, and virtually they killed all of them because they didn't understand that what happens to a vine during cold spell. So let me hit into that just a touch, because this is something that's ultimately going to be a make or break decision for people who put in commercial vineyards. You really, really need to understand the cold hardy part of what we're talking about here. So let's take a look at this. The upper chart there shows what we call a profile of grape bud hardiness. Now, if you start on the left-hand side of that top chart, you'll see starting in September. Now, this is going from basically summer growing time and harvest time down into the hard winter time, December, January, February, and then back up into the growing season. This is what happens within a grapevine. It goes through what we call the acclimation scale from September to about December. Then from December to February is what we call the maximum hardiness. That is, this is the sustained cold temperature that your vine is going to be subjected to. And then starting in February, when things start to grow and shoot out, you go through the deacclimation process, and that will come back up then into the temperatures where you're outside and you're pruning and so forth. Now, to show you how this works, look at the one down below. What you see there is a red chart that talks about the hardiness for a particular vine. The top graph on that lower level there is a little squiggly line as the temperature goes up and down and up and down. This is daylight, evening. It also has to do with the phases of the moon and some other things. But you'll see right in the center there's a little period of time where the temperature could drop down below that LT50. And that LT50 means that you've got 50% bud kill. So you will lose half of your crop or half of your vines if you allow your vines to get down in that temperature. So when you're selecting a variety to be growing that's cold hardy, you need to pay attention to this bud hardiness chart and understand that even though it's a cold hardy grape, if it gets down too cold for some of the cold hardy grapes, you will actually start losing some of your vines, some of your crop. Let's take a little bit of a look at exactly what this means. On the left-hand side of the table here, we call it the growth stage: first swell, full swell, bud burst. And if you take a look at the temperature, this, for example, the first swell, at 13 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll get what we call the 10% kill rate. That is, 10% of all of your buds will be killed if the temperature, when your buds are starting to first swell, if they're exposed to 13 degrees Fahrenheit, you will get 10% kill of those buds. At 7 degrees, you'll get 50% kill. And at -3, you basically have lost 90% of your buds. And that means that the crop that comes from that is going to be lost. Going down to the next one, you see the full swell. There it's fully swollen out, but it's not popped open yet. And there, it only takes 26 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just a few degrees below freezing to get 10% kill. You'll get 21 degrees Fahrenheit will get you 50% kill, and 10 degrees Fahrenheit at that point will get you 90% kill. So if you move down this chart, as these things start to leaf out and grow, you'll see that they become less and less susceptible, more and more likely to have frost damage than you do when they have not fully swollen out. So you need to be able to learn to determine where your growth stage is for your vines and watch the temperature very carefully, and then be able to determine if you've got the right things going on in your vines. One of the things that we learned a little while ago from Charlie Caldwell, who was a speaker at one of our grape conferences last year, is the plant tissue pH. He's been doing some very interesting measurement on this. What we discovered is that the pH is 7 or above, there's a greater risk of insect attack. We don't know why this is, but it just appears to be that way. It could be that it's a nitrogen, phosphorus, and there could be a sulfur shortage, don't know. If the pH is 6 or lower, this is the plant tissue that we're talking about, not the soil, there's a greater risk of diseases. And this could be caused by the calcium, magnesium, or perhaps a sodium shortage. But we found that to be sort of interesting to look at. The other thing he was doing some work in is the carbohydrate levels in the cells of the vines. If he's making the measurement using a refractometer on a brisk scale, you had poor. If it was about 8, it was about 12, it's average, 16 was good, and 20 was excellent. in measuring some of the carbohydrate levels in the cells of the vines. So this is some new ways of looking at things and trying to get some relationship, what's going on in the soil, what's going on in the vine, and how it applies to vines. One of the quick ways that people can take a look at what's going on in their vineyard is just to look at the visual indications of deficiencies. If you're looking at the nitrogen, low level of nitrogen causes a pale green coloration. If you're looking at iron deficiency, you'll see the newest growth is yellower for iron. In addition, iron deficiency, if not too deficient, you'll have green veins in the leaves with yellowness in between the veins. So each one of these deficiencies here shows itself in what is happening on the vine. So if you learn to read this, it'll give you a clue as to what you need to be doing with the soil to try to correct these deficiencies and get yourself in the position to have nice healthy vines. But going back as a repeat on one of the things I said earlier, everything starts in the soil. If you've got good soil, good balanced soil, good healthy soil, you're going to have wonderful grapevines. When it comes to taking a look at all of the research that's going on in the United States for cold hardy grapes, there are a few places I strongly suggest that you look. Just as a mention, one of the greatest and largest collections of information on grapes in general is the University of California, Davis. But if it's talking about cold hardy grapes, they really don't have any serious work going on there on cold hardiness that we're aware of. At least it doesn't show up on any of their web pages. But there are a few places here in the United States that have really good information on the cold hardy grapes. Here's a picture of a 2-year-old Niagara growing in one of my test plots. When we first put this plant in, it was about 8 inches tall. And so this is the second year that it was growing, and you can see how vigorous it is. This is probably one of the most vigorous cold hardy grapes I have in my vineyard. This thing will grow 25, 30 feet long. It's just phenomenal as to how vigorous this thing is. And it's pretty productive. We've seen grape clusters. We had to pinch off all kinds of grapes last year, and this year we're going to be letting grapes grow on for the first time, so we're looking forward to that. Okay. Cold hardy locations of people who are doing things with grape. University of Minnesota. University of Minnesota is the repository now for all the wonderful work that Elmer Swinson did. Elmer Swinson was a farmer back in the last century who spent 55 years of his life breeding grapes, specifically cold hardy grapes. These are 4 of the most successful ones coming out of University of Minnesota. When Elmer died back in '96, I think it was, his wife donated all of his work and his notes and his vineyards and so forth to the University of Minnesota, and they're perpetuating his work now. But these are wonderful cold hardy grapes. Most of these things are cold hardy down to -30. I mean, they know what cold hardy means up there, and these grapes do grow very well here in the mountains, by the way. Another source of really good information on cold hardy grapes is Cornell University in upstate New York. Cornell has done a couple of things that are unusual. For example, they have what they call a dual trunk system. This was developed up there. They call it the spare parts viticulture approach. They actually allow 2 trunks to grow up, and if one of them happens to get killed by winter kill, you still have one full trunk that's capable of producing a good load of grapes for you. So Cornell is doing some wonderful things. They also have a series of new grapes that they've been introduced to the market. The most recent one was called Regent. Regent is very, very disease resistant. We've got a couple people who are growing them here in the mountains now, and they're also extremely cold hardy. So we think that that's going to be a nice addition to the potential grapes. It makes a wonderful wine grape. Another place that's doing a lot of good work in cold hardy research is Michigan State University. All of these colleges and universities can be searched online. You Google on there and get into their viticulture and enology sections, and you'll just spend days, absolutely days, reading through and analyzing all information and how it applies to you. One of the interesting things that we've found out the hard way is that even though University of California, Davis is a wonderful source of information about all things grape and wine, a lot of the information they have on there does not apply to us here in the mountains because we have the altitude here We also have totally different types of soils here, and more importantly for us is they don't have any, at least I have not been able to find any significant work that they've done on cold hardy grapes, because they just don't do it. They raise a lot of vinifera there, and the dry, warm climate is ideal for that. So, but Michigan State University is another one. They produced some more information like this. Again, you'll see this type of information on most of the viticulture sites on these various cold hardy university research areas. And I like the ones with the pictures because it helps you to identify exactly what stage your vines are in until you become familiar with the terminology and so forth. This gives you a much better view of what's going on. There's also Iowa State University. Iowa State University is probably one of the better cold hardy areas. Most people don't realize that they are much colder than we are here in North Carolina. They have much better soils than we have here in the mountains. But they also have very, very high disease pressure. I know Charlie Caldwell at Black Squirrel Vineyard is one of the few producers in the Midwest who are growing these grapes organically. They originally told him, thought he was crazy, he couldn't do that, and he spent the last 10 or 12 years of his life growing these things. His grapes, he's mostly Native American grapes and French American hybrids, and he has been very, very successful on growing things organically. And when he sells his grapes, he gets top dollar because they are organically grown. Down in the lower left-hand corner, that purple star, you see Black Squirrel Vineyard. That's where Charlie Caldwell's vineyard is. And you can see the zones there, 5B in the lower right, 5A across the center, and in 4B, it's -20 to -25 F average temperatures in the wintertime. So if you don't have cold hardy grapes there, you're really going to be up the creek. Here in Madison County, where we're growing, we typically see single digits, maybe commonly double digits, but once in a great while we'll see a single digit since we've been here. So Iowa State is much colder than we are. We pay attention to a lot of things they have coming out of the area because it does apply to what we're doing here in the mountains with the cold hardy work. For example, I went back and picked up some things off of their website just to show you. This is a 2002 Leopold Center. This is one of their grape trial areas. You'll see circled down there Traminette. Traminette is one of those French American hybrids that does pretty well as a wine grape. They call it medium or moderately hardy MH. That's -10 F. That would work very, very well for us here in the mountains. You can see here's another one. This is 2003 wine grape trial. It's some New York varieties there on the left, Minnesota, Wisconsin varieties there in the center, and then there's some cultivars not in the 2002 planting that they planted, and they determined what the cold hardiness was for them. We happen to be growing here. It's on Marquette. No, it's not the Marquette. Sorry. Then the detail of it. Here's the Traminette. It's a nice, pretty grape. Makes a wine that's very similar to a Gewürztraminer. It's one of my favorite grapes and favorite wines. This was released from New York back in '96. Note down there, it's not adapted to shorter growing seasons, and so we need to pay attention to the number of growing days that's required for this particular grape if we're growing here. So when you're looking to put grapes in, make sure you understand all this information about it to make the right decisions for the vineyard that you're going to be putting in. Another one that we found that's pretty good on the cold hardiness information is Washington State University. Of course, they're being in the northwestern part of the continental United States. They have some very, very nice vineyard areas up there. And we've been sort of impressed with the quality of the wines coming out of there, although my favorite Pinot Noir still comes out of Willamette Valley in Oregon. They seem to have figured out how things work best there, but they're not so much working on cold hardy grapes as Washington State is. When you start looking at the plant structure, the sensitivity, and the cold hardiness for grapes, you need to, again, I want to familiarize you with some of the terminology that you'll hear in the business. And when you talk to other grape farmers or who are raising grapes, you'll hear some of these words used. There's the phloem that conducts the sugars and other metabolic products downward from the leaves to the roots. And there's the xylem, which is the center green part of the plant that conducts the water and the dissolved nutrients from the root up to the leaves and the grapes. So if you're dealing with cold hardiness, you need to know how to assess the cold hardy damage that you're going to experience. And so let's get familiar here just for a second with the plant structure sensitivity and cold hardiness. Take a look at the top word there on the chart. It says phloem. There's actually 3 little layers in this particular one. And then there's the peridome, the primary phloem, the cork cambium. There's a whole bunch of technical terms in it we don't really talk a whole bunch about. But what we really are interested in is the one called the xylem. That is the woody part, xylem. That's we refer to as the green part of the interior of the cane, and the phloem. Those are the 2 that will help you realize what damages you have, what steps need to be taken to help in your vineyard. And the sentence right down the very bottom of the slide there says the phloem damage, that is that outer bark area there, that phloem damage heals more readily than xylem damage. And the xylem damage, that green interior part, you got damage in that part, it usually kills the vine. So just so that you know how this works, I want to give you a couple little tips on how to do this to familiarize you, because if you're growing grapes in the mountains, you need to be able to understand your vines and read what they're doing and what they're saying to you. This is a picture of a young vine, taking a razor blade and sliced off a little section out of one of the canes so you can sort of see what this looks like. And what you're looking at in this picture is the center lime green part there. That's the xylem. Okay, and the xylem is the part that brings the water up from the root up to the grapes and the leaves. And it's surrounded by dead phloem, the brown, the band of dark brown between the bark, which is the tan color there. That's actually dead phloem, and it was caused by being exposed to cold temperature too long, and it's actually killed that. Now, in this case, this would probably survive, and it would be okay, but if you had damage that went into the green area, then you'd start to get some very questionable survivability. Notice that the destruction of either tissue can result in reduced shoot growth and smaller leaves on the left-hand side there. If you've got phloem damage or xylem damage, you can have a variety of results that will come out of that. So you really need to be able to assess this so you know what to expect. Now, one of the ways to do this is to actually cut into the bark and into the phloem. Now, in this particular case, we've taken a slice out of one of the older canes. It's right near the base of the vine. And you'll see some concentric circles there showing the bark, the dead phloem, and the live xylem. Now, the tip of that red arrow is on the live xylem. But right next to that, it shades into the dark brown area, and that's the dead xylem. And that is not good. This vine is not going to survive this, and it's going to be some serious problems, and probably will end up killing the vine. And as I said earlier, you can have some damage to the phloem, that outer bark area, but you cannot have any serious damage to that xylem, because once that starts freezing, you're on your way to having a dead vine. And here's another thin slice where we remove the bark and expose the dead brown phloem underneath. This one is practically a corner. Again, a razor blade and a magnifying glass will help you determine a whole bunch of things. Here's one that's been cut in two. You can see the entire trunk is brown and dead. This one's gone. This one will have to be replaced because it's now a dead vine. There's no green whatsoever in the xylem there. And when you have freezing coming in the spring and into the summer, this is the result. This is what you'll see if you've had winter damage. On the left-hand side, you'll see an excess of suckers. Typically on a grapevine, you'll have maybe 2 or 3 coming out of the bottom. Here you've got almost a dozen or more. The next one over is you'll see aerial roots. This will be the attempt of the vine to send out roots into soil which is non-existent. But this is what happens when you have freeze damage. You also have crown gall, that third picture. You see this, and you know you've had some winter damage. And of course, the obvious one, it's easy to read on the far right-hand side, is the split trunk. And if you get a split trunk, you just have an entry point for various kinds of diseases and places for rotting to start. And you're going to have some serious problems to deal with there from the damage. This is a chart. I have long-term hopes that someplace, somehow here in the mountains, we'll be able to get the kind of data that they're producing out of California and some other regions. Even in Germany and France, they have this type of weather data. And they have it set up for each one of the types of grapes that they have in the fields. And what you'll see in that top zone there is the actual temperature variations. That's the min and the max for the days and the nights and so forth on a go-forward basis through the winter. And down at the very bottom there, you've got the PHL10 and XYL10. This is the phloem and the xylem, 10% damage. And you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, there's a bud 10, bud 50, and bud 90. That's the bud damage. So if those temperatures reach down into that, that should give you an indication of what to be looking for come spring to assess what kind of damage you had over the winter. Colorado State University is the last one I think I'm going to mention to you with some cold hardiness data. They have some very interesting pictures here I want to share with you. This is one way to determine what your bud damage is. You can go through the vineyard and just cut off a whole bunch of buds and stick them in a water bath. On the left-hand side, you can see them put in. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the single-node cuttings after 34 days. And from this, you can see there's probably about 75–80% survival rate. So you had about 20% to kill coming off of that. This is a little bit of a pain. I don't prefer to use this method. I have seen it used. But my preferred way to do this is just with a razor blade and a magnifying glass. If you go out into the dormant vineyard before anything comes out in the spring, take a razor blade and slice off one of the buds and take a look at the bud very closely. Here's what you're going to see. You're going to see the primary, that's the one labeled P, you're going to see the primary bud there is dead. There's no green in there, just a little dark brown circle or two. And over on the right-hand side, you see the green one labeled the S. That stands for the secondary bud. And the tertiary bud is just barely showing. I didn't even bother pointing it out in this particular cut. But this shows you that your primary bud is dead. And if you go through and, say, make 100 cuts in your vineyard and determine that you've got 10% kill rate or 20% kill rate of your primary, this tells you how much damage you had during the winter for that particular grapevine. So get to be good at using a straight-edge razor blade and a magnifying glass, and this can tell you very, very quickly what amount of damage you had. Here's a couple more of the pictures. On the left-hand side, you'll see the primary, secondary, and tertiary. I've got them all labeled there. You can see them. Of course, the primary is all the big one. And you can see on the far left-hand side, they're all alive. The one in the center has got the center primary bud is dead. It's brown, but the secondary and the tertiary are still alive. And the one on the right-hand side shows that the whole bud's dead. Primary, secondary, tertiary are all dead. So you're not going to get any grapes, any leaves off of that bud at all. Here's some other pictures, again, just to show you some variation in it. Here's an external dried bud on the upper left-hand side. Here's an internal live bud. You can see primary, secondary on the left, and tertiary on the right of that picture. On the lower left-hand side, you'll see an internal primary bud dead. The primary is dead. Okay, you see the secondary, tertiary still green. And on the lower right-hand side, the entire bud is dead. So if you learn to see this and recognize this, it becomes very easy for you to assess what kind of winter damage you've had in your vineyard. And also, there's another picture of crown gall that's caused by winter damage. So you pay attention to vines, learn how to read them. They're going to talk to you and tell you a lot of things that's going on in the soil as well as in the vine itself with the health of the vine. This is typical. You see some air roots there coming out at the top, just above the crown gall damage. But when you see this kind of problem, you've got the wrong kind of grapes. The last section I want to talk to you about today is markets and value-added products from grapes. I spent some time working with some folks out in Washington State about a year and a half ago, and out of some of the work that I was doing, I was able to get a couple of interesting charts. For example, here on the far left-hand side, we're looking at the markets and the value-added products that come from grapes. So we say, with the grapes, we say, okay, there's three basically approaches to using grapes. One is direct to the consumer. You'll see there's produce stand, farmers market, CSAs, pick your own custom orders, and so forth. In the commercial channels, in the pink part, there's direct to the commercial users, and these commercial users are regional special groceries, restaurants, caterers, and so forth. It could be to the wineries, food processors, other shippers and wholesalers. And if you look at the orange one where it says value-added products, you're talking about table grapes, muscadine smoothie drinks, raisins, juice concentrate, vinegars. On the right-hand side of that, you'll see flavored vinegars and balsamic vinegar. We have a couple people in the mountains now who want to get into creating balsamic vinegars, which is wonderful. That's a great value-added process that's fun to do. And then underneath that, you'll see picmets. I mean, that's a fancy word, which means syrup. You can have grape syrup for putting on pancakes, that kind of thing. Verjuice. Verjuice is a special type of green juice that's used in a variety of cooking things. There's sweet spreads, dried products such as fruit leathers, and down at the very bottom you see wine. Wine is the one that most people think about when you start talking about grapes. But from the wine, there is created a whole series of things. If you see to the right of the one at wine, the yellow block there says winery waste. If we take a look at the winery waste, starting on the left-hand side, you'll see on the top from the grape seeds you can have oil. That oil can go either solvent extracted or cold pressed, virgin oil and flavored to make frying oils, cosmetics, condiments, lubricants, and so forth. If you've got pressed cake coming out of the grape seeds, you've got grapeseed extract sold to the nutraceuticals industry, a variety of products that come in there, the nutritional food additives, baking ingredients, pasta sauces, beverages, and so forth. And even in bioenergy, I saw a plant that was using the solid fuel pellets that they're taking from the dried grape seeds and turning into fuel, and they were using it fuel for processing and the manufacturing. So it covers a broad range of products. And down on the bottom of that is ethanol distillation, or for people making biodiesel fuel. And of course, you can also make some specialty beverages, brandies, grappa, fortified beverages, and so forth. Tartaric and tannic acid recovery. And then there's a yellow block there that says fiber. And I'll just show you the fiber. I thought this was fascinating, what Washington State's doing now that they have a couple hundred wineries there. They're making paper. They call it Graper. It's used for edible food wraps, decorative elements, wall treatments, window treatments, specialty papers, lampshades, even as a part of aromatherapy because it gives off a special smell. There's pigments that you can get out for ink stains and paints, and the sugars that are reclaimed for medical ketones to treat metabolic odors, and the biodegradable plastics manufacture. Compost soil amendment is what we use with some of ours here. It's nitrogen-rich, space conditioner, and so forth. There's structural composites that can be made out of it. There's feed supplements that are made out of it. And then there's biofuel, which is an anaerobic process of creating energy. So this should give you a good idea of the kinds of products that can come from grapes. And whenever people talk about, you know, why are you growing grapes? Well, it's my offhand answer is it's not just the grapes. It's all of the products that come from it if we really start to produce a lot of grapes in this area. A couple of years ago, I formed an organization here in the mountains called the Southern Appalachian Viticulture Institute. This is the educational arm of the work that we're doing here at Jewel of the Blue Ridge Vineyard. We've had a number of people who are currently serving and have served on our board of advisors. These are the top people in the United States in their various specialties that serve as an advisor for us to help us give some direction into the kinds of things that we want to do and where we want to go next. And no matter if I've been doing this kind of thing for almost 40 years, the depth of my ignorance is almost astounding some days. I can't possibly know it all and know everything. So I really need a lot of people helping me and looking over my shoulder and giving me help and guidance. And the Board of Advisors have been absolutely phenomenal in pointing us in the right direction and helping us. That's the end of the formal presentation day for growing the raw material for grape-based industry in western North Carolina. I realized there was a lot of information in there, and I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to get exposed to the broad range of different types of things you need to know before you get started in making decisions, and what kind of products to get into, and some of the issues that you may run into in trying to grow grapes in the mountains. But it's a phenomenal opportunity, and we are right at the very tip, at the very beginning of it. So I'm going to turn the program back over to Greg, and he'll do some additional information for you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, Chuck. I'm going to put up some questions. I'm going to turn this back over to you and let you go ahead and address each of these 12 questions for our audience.
Okay, Greg. Thanks, everybody, for being patient and listening through all this stuff. I see there's some nice questions there. I'll try to take them one at a time and give some answers. Number one, you mentioned the soil is important in growing grapes, and western North Carolina is prime for that. What are the differences in soil from western North Carolina and the Sandhills and Piedmont areas that make variety choice so different? First of all, if you look at that original map that I showed you about, the coastal region on the east, the soil is primarily sand. And if you are working with sand, you're working with pH problems and drainage problems that we don't have here. Sand does not hold water very well. It's almost imperative that you have some kind of irrigation systems in place. The water just drains so quickly out of the sand that it doesn't make it worthwhile to try to grow something unless you have irrigation in real sandy soils. In the middle of the state, what we call the foothills of the Piedmont, the soil there tends to be a mix of sand and clay. And it also has certain areas that are almost pastoral. There's these beautiful, long, rolling pastures and so forth from the past. The problems you have there is more of an environmental one. That is, the relative humidity and temperature is much higher than what we have here in the mountains, and therefore you have weed pressure and disease pressure that's somewhat higher. In the eastern regions, if you're going to be growing traditional types of grapes, there's a disease called Pierce's disease that so far has not been able to survive in the mountainous areas. So we don't have that problem with Pierce's disease. That's one of the bugaboos of the viticulture industry. And if you live in a region where you've got Pierce's disease, it kills the vine. And so far they have there's no solution, and there's no way to prevent it that they know of. So the North Carolina State University and some other states are working furiously trying to figure out how to solve this problem. But so far we don't have that problem in the mountains, and it has to do with the temperature, much less the types of soil. We do have a unique soil here. This is clay-based soil. Clay-based soil has more minerals, doesn't require anywhere near as much irrigation. It'll hold the water for long periods of time, and certain types of grape rootstocks are capable of pulling that moisture out of the soil, and it makes it a little more disease or drought tolerant. Question number two: can you discuss the soil differences for vinifera between western North Carolina and European countries again? If you take a look at, I'm going to pick on France because I spent a lot of time there. Well, spent a lot of time in most of these countries in Italy. But if you take a look at the best wineries, best vineyards in Europe, you will find that these vineyards are planted on some of the crappiest soil on the planet. Rocky, just absolutely terribly chalky soils. And these regions give the wines that grow there some unique characteristics and unique flavors. And so we don't have that here. We don't have chalky soils here in western North Carolina. We don't have primarily volcanic soils like they do in a lot of Italy here in western North Carolina. We have residual granite soils. And the residual granite soils are classically clay or high clay content. If you have a farm or an area that has a valley or a flat spot, chances are you have a little bit richer soil there because it's down and flat, it's been flooded, and it will still have a very high percentage of clay, which is good, but you do not want to be putting in vineyards on flat lands down in the valleys because you're going to get a lot of cold pocketing, and it's going to kill a lot of the vines. And you don't want to put them right on top of the mountain, because the top of the mountain in the wintertime, because the wind is blowing constantly, you're going to get the ground frozen deeper, and you're going to sustain more what I call winter kill or cold damage to your vines during the wintertime. I hope that answers that question. Question number 3, what wineries are making wine from Katuah Muscadines? At this point in time, there are no wineries in western North Carolina making wines from Katuah Muscadines because there are no commercial vineyards growing Katuah Muscadines other than the Jewel of the Blue Ridge Vineyard this year. We have a number of people who placed orders to start planting out serious acreage. We've got enough vines for several additional acres coming out this summer where people bought them, and we're probably 4 years or 5 years away from having any commercial quantities of Katuah Muscadines available for sale. I've already been approached by 3 different wineries in the region here who want to buy every grape that I can grow because they want this unique wine as part of their lineup, and we're more than anxious to try to sell it to them. Question number 4, what is the difference in soil pH from coast to coast in North Carolina? Can't answer that because I don't know. I know that sandy soils tend to be more acidic because there tends to be a lot of pines that are growing in there. But here in the mountains, we also have acidic soils, and that's because I've measured probably hundreds of them here in the mountains, and they all range between pH of 4. I think I've measured one as 4.7 once, and a few of them go up to 6.2, but typically it's less than 6. And grapes have to be growing in soil with a pH of 6 or more to be sustainable and happy. So what we do here in the mountains, we adjust our pH. Ours happen to be about 5.7 in our vineyard. We put on a coating of lime, and that lime would kick the pH about 6.2, and it'll stay there. That lime is cheap, it's easy to put on, and it'll last for 5 or 6 years before we have to put another coat on it. Can't give you a good answer for what the pH of the soil is out in the rest of North Carolina. Sorry. You listed percentages for healthy soil. What's the cutoff or threshold to be considered unhealthy soil? Okay. Unhealthy soil is soil that you dig down and you can't find any earthworms. Soil that you dig down in and there's no mycorrhizae fungi growing. It's soil where you dig down and all you find is rock and clay and sand. No earthworms, no subterranean critters of any kind is unhealthy soil. Everything really starts with the soil. If you've got good, healthy soil, you're going to grow great crops, whatever it is, including grapes on top of it. So we really need to study and work harder. And that's why we here at the Jewel of the Blue Ridge have decided to go to biodynamic farming, because it uses a lot of the natural things we have here. It's totally sustainable long term. We don't have to be bringing in chemicals from outside. And we're growing just much healthier vegetables and fruits and everything else that we're growing here, not just the grapes. Number 6, what makes Sangiovese grow upward? Gosh, I wish I had an answer to that. All the grapes in the world I talked about, the 15,000 varieties, tend to be either what they call drooping growth, which means hanging downward or downward growth, or they happen to be upward growth. All of the European grapes, including Sangiovese, the Italian variety, are what we call upward growth. That means as the shoots grow, they want to grow straight up. And that's why you have to have a trellising system with catch wires, because as these things grow up, the wind starts blowing them and they'll break the branches. I have seen major damage from wind in vineyards that didn't have catch wires. So it just happens to be that Sangiovese is one of the European grapes, or the vinifera, and that's the way they grow. Okay, why do we remove 90% of previous season's growth? Do you do this annually? The answer is yes. And the reason you have to do this is because you want to force the roots, which are used to growing the number of leaves and vines, canes up above it. You want to have those larger roots force all of its growth into what you want it to grow, which is the grapes. If you leave all of the canes on there, and I see people in the mountains are doing this all the time with their concords out back, it's, oh, we're going to get more grapes. Well, what happens is you will get more grapes, but you will get smaller clusters. So the overall production is not going to go up. You're just going to have more clusters, and you're going to have a rat's nest to deal with. So proper removing of 90% of the previous season's growth gives you that ability to help make the grapes grow the way you want. So you control the number of canes that are coming out by pruning it off, and once they start producing vines and grapes, you then further go through and do something called cluster thinning or grapevine cluster thinning, where you reduce the number of clusters on a typical commercial vineyard vine so that you have no less than 26 and no more than 34 clusters of grapes per vine. And that gives you the optimum, maximum quality production of grapes for growing table grapes or wine. Okay, I hope that answers that one. Okay. Number 8, does a higher Brix reading indicate you would have a higher alcohol content when making wine? The answer is yes. It's a direct relationship. If you start off with a wine that has a Brix of, say, 18 or 19, you're going to have a wine with a concentration of roughly 9%. If you start off with grapes that are harvested at, say, 26 Brix, you're going to have upwards of 14, maybe close to 15% alcohol in the wine. Number 9, are there man-made or mechanical methods employed to prevent bud kill during winter months when the chance exists? The answer is yes. You can put out smudge pots. You can put out windmills. You can have one group I know hired helicopters to come in and blow warm air down over the vineyards. But the cost of that has got to be astronomical. So the answer is yes. There are means to do that. Really just depends on how big your pocketbook is and how big a crop you're trying to save, and if you're trying to minimize the loss or if you're trying to make a profit. I just can't imagine having helicopters hover over your vineyard all night long is going to be an inexpensive proposition. But yes, there are many, many approaches to do that. Okay, number 10, where can one that is considering commercial production find resources on market size, demand growth, and typical margins for various grape market applications? You will have to spend a lot of time talking to people like me and talking to people like Nkn Vineyards and Duplin and Shelton Vineyards and Childress Vineyards and all the other vineyards around the state. There are so many variables that goes into this that I can't give you a fixed answer unless you show me specifically where the land is you're going to be growing and what kind of grapes you're going to be growing and what density you're going to be planting and so forth and so on. I can start to give you an idea of where you can sell the grapes. But most people who are getting into commercial vineyards start looking early for a market for their grapes. When we first planted our vineyard here, we had conversations with a number of local wineries and told them what we were trying to do and got commitments from them that, yep, we'll buy, if you're not going to be having more grapes than this or that and the other, we'll buy all you can produce because we don't have a huge vineyard here. And, at maximum production on our system, we'll probably get somewhere between 8 and 10 tons. But I've got 3 different nutraceutical companies who want to buy it because it's all being organically and biodynamically produced. So it's something where you have to go do a lot of work on your own to figure that out, or have somebody work with you to help give you some direction on that. There's no one single place to go. The state has some good supportive stuff, but it's a bunch of references. You're still going to have to go out and do all the work on your own. There's just no simple, easy cookbook place to go get that. Number 11, where can one find information similar to that presented today for growing grapes in the Piedmont and coastal plains? You contact Surrey Community College and you contact Appalachian State University.
and they're overflowing with that kind of information for the Piedmont. North Carolina State University has a lot of good publications on coastal growing.
Chuck, if I can add, I'd like to also mention that we had done a previous BioForum, the BioNetwork, regarding some of the both eastern and western North Carolina winemaking efforts in our state, where there was some good information too, and that was presented probably 9 months ago. So we do have that archived if anyone is listening, whoever asked that question, would like to get some additional information on grape growing in the state of North Carolina in areas other than the mountainous part of western North Carolina. There is information on our website as well as the resources that you mentioned. And we have one final question.
Okay, so the last question is the Katuah Muscadine a female or perfect flowered plant? I'm happy to say that we discovered it's a perfect flowered plant. That finishes all the questions on the list that I had, Greg.
Okay, great. Well, as we wrap up today, first of all, I'd like to thank Chuck for his wonderful presentation. We had a lot of good questions come out of your presentation. You can find out about other BioForum events by visiting our website, ncbionetwork.org. Please mark your calendar for our next BioForum, Opportunities for North Carolina Farmers and Growers to Produce Higher Value Crops. This will be presented on June 7th at 10 a.m. Registration for this event is free and available online at ncbionetwork.org. So please check back for that. I would also like to thank, once again, our panelist, Chuck Blethen, for today's presentation. Thanks also to the North Carolina BioNetwork for making this presentation possible. And thank you for your time and participation. This concludes our webinar today, and on behalf of BioNetwork, we hope you have a good day. Thank you once again.